Chapter 12. The Sayers of the Law. Then something cold touched my hand. I started violently and saw close to me a dim pinkish thing, looking more like a flayed child than anything else in the world. The creature had exactly the mild but repulsive features of a sloth, the same low forehead and slow gestures. As the first shock of the change of light passed, I saw about me more distinctly. The little sloth-like creature was standing and staring at me. My conductor had vanished. The place was a narrow passage between high walls of lava, a crack in the knotted rock, and on either side, interwoven heaps of sea mat. Palm fans and reeds leaning against the rock formed rough and impenetrably dark dens. The winding way up the ravine between these scarcely 3 yards wide, and was disfigured by lumps of decaying fruit and pulp and other refuse, which accounted for the disagreeable stench of the place. The little pink sloth creature was still blinking at me when my ape man reappeared at the aperture of the nearest of these dens and beckoned me in. As he did, so a slouching monster wriggled out of one of the places further up this strange street and stood up in its featureless silhouette against the bright green beyond, staring at me. I hesitated, having half a mind to bolt the way I had come, and then, determined to go through with the adventure, I gripped my nailed stick about the middle and crawled into the little evil-smelling lean-to after my conductor. It was a semicircular space, shaped like the half of a beehive, and against the rocky wall that formed the inner side of it was a pile of variegated fruits, coconuts among others. Some rough vessels of lava and wood stood about on the floor, and one on a rough stool. There was no fire. In the darkest corner of the hut sat a shapeless mass of darkness that grunted, "Hey!" as I came in, and my ape man stood in the dim light of the doorway and held out a spilt coconut to me as I crawled into the other corner and squatted down. I took it and began gnawing at it, as serenely as possible, in spite of a certain trepidation and nearly intolerable closeness of the din. The little pink sloth creature stood in the aperture of the hut, and something else with a drab face and bright eyes came staring over its shoulders. "Hey!" came out of the lump of misery opposite. "It is a man." "It is a man," gabbed my conductor. A man, a 5-man, like me." "Shut up," said the voice from the dark, and grunted. I gnawed my coconut amid an impressive stillness. I peered hard into the blackness, but I could not distinguish. Nothing. "It is a man," the voice repeated. "He comes to live with us." It was a thick voice, with something in it, a kind of whistling overtone that struck me as peculiar, but the English accent was strangely good. The ape man looked at me as though he expected something. I perceived the pause was interrogative. "He comes to live with you," I said. "It's a man. He must learn the law." I began to distinguish now a deeper blackness in the black, a vague outline of a hunched-up figure. Then I noticed the opening of the place was darkened by 2 more black heads. My hand tightened on my stick. The thing in the dark repeated in a louder tone, "Say the words." I had missed its last remark, "Not to go on all fours. That's the law." It repeated in a kind of sing-song. I was puzzled. "Say the words," said the ape-man, repeating. The figures in the doorway echoed this, with a threat in a tone of their voices. I realized that I had to repeat the idiotic formula, and then began the incessant ceremony. The voice in the dark began intoning a mad litany, line by line, and I had to repeat the rest. As they did so, they swayed from side to side in the oddest way, and beat their hands upon their knees, and I followed their example. I could have imagined I was already dead in another world, and that dark hut, these grotesque dim figures, just flecked here and there by a glimmer of light, and all of them swaying in unison and chanting, "Not to go on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to suck up drink, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to eat fish or flesh, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to claw the bark of the trees, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to chase other men, that is the law. Are we not men?" And so, from the prohibition of these acts of folly on to the prohibition of what I thought then were the maddest, most impossible, and most indecent things one could well imagine, a kind of rhythmic fervor fell on all of us. We grabbed and swayed faster and faster, repeating this amazing law. Superficially, the contagion of these brutes was upon me, but the deep down within me, the laughter and disgust struggled together. We ran through a long list of prohibitions, and then the chance swung round to a new one, this new formula. His is the house of pain. His is the hand that makes. His is the hand that wounds. His is the hand that heals. And so on for another long series, most quite incomprehensible gibberish to me about him, whomever he might be. I could have fancied it was a dream, but never before have I heard chanting in a dream. His is the lightning flash, we sang. His is the deep salt sea. A horrible fancy came into my head that Moreau, after animalizing these men, had infected their dwarfed brains with a kind of deification of himself. However, I was too keenly aware of white teeth and strong claws about me to stop my chanting on that account. His are the stars in the sky. At last that song ended. I saw the ape-man's face shining with perspiration, and my eyes being now accustomed to the darkness, I saw more distinctly the figure in the corner from which the voice came. It was the size of a man, but it seemed covered with a dull gray hair, almost like a Skye terrier. What was it? What were they all? Imagine yourself surrounded by all the most horrible cripples and maniacs it is possible to conceive, and you may understand a little of my feelings with these grotesque caricatures of humanity about me. "He was a five-man, like me," said the ape-man. I held out my hands. The gray creature in the corner leaned over and looked forward at me. "Not to run on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men?" he said. He put out a strangely distorted talon and gripped my fingers. The thing was almost like the hoof of a deer produced into claws. I could have yelled with surprise and pain. His face came forward and peered at my nails, came forward into the light of the opening of the hut, and I saw with a quivering disgust that it was like the face of neither man nor beast, but a mere shock of gray hair with three shadowy overarchings to mark the eyes and mouth. "He has little nails," said this grisly creature in his hairy beard. "It is well." He threw my hand down, and instinctively I gripped my stick. "Eat roots and herbs. It is his will," said the ape-man. "I am the sayer of the law," said the gray figure. "Here come all that be new to learn the law. I sit in the darkness and say the law." "It is even so," said one of the beasts in the doorway. "Evil are punishments of those who break the law. None escape, none escape." The beast folk glancing furtively at one another. "None, none," said the ape-man, "none escape. See, I did a little thing, a wrong thing once. I jabbered, stopped talking. None could understand. I am burnt, branded in the hand. He is great, he is good." "None escape," said the gray creature in the corner. "None escape," said the beast people, looking askance at one another. For every one the want that is bad, said the gray sayer of the law. What you will want, we do not know. We shall know. Some want to follow things that move, to watch and slink and wait and spring, to kill and bite deep and rich, sucking the blood. It is bad. Not to chase the other men, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to eat flesh or fish, that is the law. Are we not men? None escape, said a dappled brute standing in the doorway. For every one the want is bad, said the gray sayer of the law. Some want to go tearing with teeth and hands into the roots of things, snuffing into the earth. It is bad. None escape, said the men in the door. Some go clawing trees, some go scratching at the graves of the dead, some go fighting with foreheads or feet or claws, some bite suddenly, none giving occasion, some love uncleanliness. None escape, said the ape man, scratching his calf. None escape, said the pink sloth creature. Punishment is sharp and sure, therefore learn the law, say the words. And incontinently he began again the strange litany of the law. And again I and all these creatures began singing and swaying. My head reeled with this jabbering and the close stench of the place, but I kept on, trusting to find presently some chance of a new development. Not to go on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men? We are making such a noise that I noticed nothing of the tumult outside until someone, who I think was one of the 2 swine men I had seen, thrust his head over the little pink sloth creature and shouted something excitedly, something that I did not catch. Incontinently, those at the opening of the hut vanished. My 8 men rushed out, and the thing that had sat in the dark followed him. I only observed that it was big and clumsy and covered with silvery hair, and I was left alone. Then, before I reached the aperture, I heard the yelp of a stage hound. In another moment, I was standing outside the hovel, my chair rail in my hand, every muscle of me quivering. Before me were the clumsy backs of perhaps a score of these beast people, their misshapen heads half hidden by their shoulder blades. They were gesticulating excitedly over half animal faces glared interrogation out of the hovels. Looking in the direction in which they faced, I saw coming through the haze under the trees beyond the end of the passage of dens the dark figure and awful white face of Moreau. He was holding the leaping staghound back, and close behind him came Montgomery, revolver in hand. For a moment I stood horror-struck. I turned and saw the passage behind me blocked by another heavy brute with a huge gray face and twinkling little eyes advancing towards me. I looked around and saw to the right of me and a half-dozen yards in front of me a narrow gap in the wall of rock through which a ray of light slanted into the shadows. "Stop!" cried Moreau as I strode towards this. And then, "Hold him!" At that, first one face turned towards me, then others. Their bestial minds were happily slow. I dashed my shoulders into a clumsy monster who was turning to see what Moreau meant, and I flung him forward into another. I felt his hands fly around me, clutching at me and missing me. The little pink sloth creature dashed at me, and I gashed down its ugly face with the nail of my stick, and in another minute was scrambling up a steep side pathway, a kind of sloping chimney out of the ravine. I heard a howl behind me and cries of "Catch him! Hold him!" And the gray-faced creature appeared behind me and jammed his huge bulk into the cleft. Go on, they howled. I clambered up the narrow cleft of the rock and came out upon the sulphur of the westward side of the village of the beastmen. That gap was altogether fortunate for me, for the narrow chimney, slanting obliquely upward, must have impeded the nearer pursuers. I ran over the white space and down the steep slope, through a scattered growth of trees, and came to a low-lying stretch of tall reeds, through which I I pushed into a dark, thick undergrowth that was succulent underfoot. As I plunged into the reeds, my foremost pursuers emerged from the gap. I broke my way through this undergrowth for some minutes. The air behind me and about me was soon full of threatening cries. I heard the tumult of my pursuers in the gap up the slope, then crashing of the reeds, and every now and then the crackling crash of a branch. Some of the creatures soared like excited beasts of prey. The staghound yelped to the left. I heard Moreau and Montgomery shouting in the same direction. I turned sharply to the right. It seemed to me, even then, that I heard Montgomery shouting for me to run for my life. Presently, the ground gave rich and oozy under my feet, but I was desperate and went headlong into it, struggled through knee-deep, and so came to a winding path among the tall canes. The noise of my pursuers passed away to my left. In one place, 3 strange pink hopping animals, about the size of cats, bolted before my footsteps. This pathway ran up a hill, across another open space covered with white incrustation, and plunged into a canebrake again. Then suddenly it turned parallel with the edge of a steep-walled gap. Then came without warning, like the ha-ha of an English park, turned with an unexpected abruptness. I was still running with all my might, and I never saw this drop until I was flying headlong through the air. I fell on my forehead and arms among thorns and rose with a torn ear and a bleeding face. I had fallen into a precipitous ravine, rocky and thorny, full of a hazy mist which drifted about me in wisps, and with a narrow streamlet from which the mist came meandering down the center. I was astonished at this thin fog in the full blaze of daylight, but I had no time to stand wondering then. I turned to my right, downstream, hoping to come to the sea in that direction, and so have found my way open to drown myself. It was only later I found I had dropped my nailed stick in my fall. Presently the ravine grew narrower for a space and carelessly stepped into the stream. I jumped out again pretty quickly, for the water was almost boiling. I noticed, too, there was a thin sulphurous scum drifting upon its coiling water. Almost immediately came a turn in the ravine, and the indistinctive blue horizon. The nearer sea was flashing the sun from the myriad facets. I saw my death before me, but I was hot and panting, with the warm blood oozing out my face and running pleasantly through my veins. I felt more than a touch of exultation to it, at having distanced my pursuers. It was not in me then to go out and drown myself just yet. I started back the way I had come. I listened, save for the hum of the gnats and the chirp of some small insects that hopped among the thorns. The air was absolutely still. Then came the yelp of a dog, very faint, and a chattering gibbering, the snap of a whip, and voices. They grew louder, then fainter again. The noise receded up the stream and faded away. For a while the chase was over, but I knew now how much hope of help for me lay in the beast people. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 12. Well, this is becoming a very mysterious and thrilling story. I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. That is it for tonight, my friends. We will continue tomorrow night with chapter 13. Thank you for joining me. This has been Indiana Holmes. Love to you all. Good night. Hello, my friends. We continue tonight with chapter 13 in the H.G. Wells novel, The Island of Dr. Moreau. Let's begin. Chapter 13, A Parley. I turned again and went on down towards the sea. I found a hot stream broadened out to a shallow, weedy sand, in which an ambulance of crabs and long-bodied, many-legged creatures started from my footfall. I walked to the very edge of the salt water, and then I felt I was safe. I turned and stared, arms akimbo, at the thick green behind me, into which the steamy ravine cut like a smoking gash. But, as they say, I was too full of excitement and, a true saying, though those who have never known danger may doubt it, too desperate to die. Then it came into my head that there was one chance before me yet. While Moreau and Montgomery and their bestial rabble chased me through the island, might I not go round the beach until I came to their enclosure, make a flank march upon them, in fact, and then with a rock lugged out of their loosely built wall, perhaps smash in the lock of the smaller door and see what I could find, knife, pistol, whatnot, to fight them with when they returned. It was at any rate something to try. So I turned westward and walked along the water's edge. The setting sun flashed with blinding heat into my eyes. The slight Pacific tide was running in a gentle ripple. Presently the shore fell away southward, and the sun came round upon my right hand. Then suddenly, far in front of me, I saw first one, then several figures emerging from the bushes. Moreau with his gray staghound, and then Montgomery and two others. At that, I stopped. They saw me and began gesticulating and advancing. I stood watching them. The two beastmen came running forward to cut me off from the undergrowth inland. Montgomery came running also, but straight towards me. Moreau followed slower with the dog. At last I roused myself from my inaction, and turning seaward, walked straight into the water. The water was very shallow at first. I was 30 yards out before the waves reached my waist. Dimly, I could see the intertidal creatures darting away from my feet. "What are you doing, man?" cried Montgomery. I turned, standing waist deep, and stared at them. Montgomery stood panting at the margin of the water. His face was bright red with exertion, his long flaxen hair blown about his head, and his dropping nether lip showed his irregular teeth. Moreau was just coming up, his face pale and firm, and a dog at his hand barked at me. Both men had heavy whips. Farther up the beach stared the beastmen. "What am I doing? I am going to drown myself," said I. Montgomery and Moreau both looked at each other. "Why?" asked Moreau. "Because that is better than being tortured by you." "I told you so," said Montgomery, and Moreau said something in a low voice. "What makes you think I shall torture you?" asked Moreau. "What I saw," I said, "and those yonder." "Hush," said Moreau, and he held up his hand. "I will not," said I. "They were men. What are they now? I at least will not be like them." I looked past my interlocutors. Upon the beach were Milling, Montgomery's attendant, and one of the white-swathed brutes from the boat. Farther up in the shadow of the trees, I saw my little ape-man, and behind him some other dim figures. "Who are these creatures?" said I, pointing to them and raising my voice more and more, that it might reach them. "They were men like yourselves, whom you have infected with some bestial taint, men whom you have enslaved or whom you still fear." "You will listen," I cried, pointing out now to Moreau and shouting past him to the beastmen. "You who listen, do you not see these men still fear you? Go in dread of you? Why then do you fear them? You are many." "For God's sake," cried Montgomery. "Stop that, Prendick." Prendick cried, "Moreau!" They both shouted together as if to drown my voice, and then behind them lowered the staring faces of the beastmen, wondering, their deformed hands hanging down, their shoulders hunched up. They seemed, as I fancied, to be trying to understand me, to remember, I thought, something of their human past. I went on shouting, I scarcely remember what, that Moreau and Montgomery could be killed, that they were not to be feared, that this was the burden of what I put into the heads of the beast people. I saw the green-eyed man in the dark rags who had met me the evening of my arrival come out from among the trees, and others followed him to hear me better. At last, for want of breath, I paused. "Listen to me for a moment," said the steady voice of Moreau, "and then say what you will." "Well," said I. He coughed, thought, and then shouted, "Latin, Prendick, bad Latin, schoolboy Latin, but try and understand. Hainon sunt homines, sunt animalia quo nos habemus vivisected." A humanizing process. I will explain. Come ashore. I laughed. "A pretty story," said I. "They talked, build houses. They were men. It is likely I'll come ashore." The water just beyond where you stand is deep and full of sharks. "That's my way," said I, "short and sharp presently. Wait a minute." He took something out of his pocket that flashed back the sun and dropped the object at his feet. "That's a loaded revolver," said he. "Montgomery. Here. Well, I'll do the same. Now we are going up the beach until you are satisfied the distance is safe. Then come and take the revolvers." "Not I. You have a third between you." "I want you to think over things, Prendick. In the first place, I never asked you to come upon this island. If we vivisected men, we should import men, not beasts. In the next, we had you drugged last night. Had we wanted to work you any mischief? And in the next, now your first panic is over and you can think a little. Is Montgomery here quite up to the character you give him? We have chased you for your good, because this island is full of inimical phenomena. Besides, why should we want to shoot you when you have just offered to drown yourself? Why did you set your people onto me when I was in the hut? We felt sure of catching you and bringing you out of danger. Afterwards, we drew you away from the scent for your own good." I mused. It seemed just possible. Then I remembered something. But I saw, said I, in the foreclosure. "That was a puma. Look here, Prendick," said Montgomery. "You're a silly ass. Come out of the water and take these revolvers and talk. We can't do anything more than we could do now." I will confess that then, and indeed always, I distrusted and dreaded Moreau. But Montgomery was a man I felt I understood. "Go up the beach," said I, after thinking, and added, holding your hands up. "Can't do that," said Montgomery, with an explanatory nod over his shoulder. "Undignified." "Go up to the trees then," said I, "as you please." "It's damn silly ceremony," said Montgomery. Both turned and faced the 6 or 7 grotesque creatures who stood there in the sunlight, solid, casting shadows, moving, and yet so incredibly unreal. Montgomery cracked his whip at them, and forthwith they all turned and fled helter-skelter into the trees. And when Montgomery and Moreau were at a distance I judged sufficient, I waded ashore and picked up and examined the revolvers. To satisfy myself against the subtlest trickery, I discharged one at a round of lump of lava, and had the satisfaction of seeing the stone pulverized and the beach splashed with lead. Still, I hesitated for a moment. "I'll take the risk," said I. At last, with a revolver in each hand, I walked up the beach towards them. "That's better," said Moreau, without affectation. "As it is, you have wasted the best part of my day with your confounded imagination, and with a touch of contempt which humiliated me. He and Montgomery turned and went on in silence before me. The knot of the beast men, still wondering, stood back among the trees. I passed them as serenely as possible. One started to follow me, but retreated again when Moreau cracked his whip. The rest stood silent, watching. They may once have been animals, but I never before saw an animal trying to think. Chapter 14. Dr. Moreau explains. And now, Prendick, I will explain, said Dr. Moreau. So soon as we had eaten and drunk, I must confess that you are the most dictatorial guest I ever entertained. I warn you that this is the last I shall do to oblige you. The next thing you threaten to commit suicide about, I shan't do, even at some personal inconvenience. He sat in my deck chair, a cigar half consumed in his white, dexterous-looking fingers. The light of the swinging lamp fell on his white hair. He stared through the little window out on the starlight. I sat as far away from him as possible, the table between us and the revolvers at hand. Montgomery was not present. I did not care to be with the two of them in such a little room. You admit that the vivisected human beings, as you called it, is, after all, only the puma, said Moreau. He had made me visit that horror in the inner room to assure myself of its inhumanity. It is the puma, I said, still alive, but so cut and mutilated as I pray I may never see living flesh again, of all vile. Never mind that, said Moreau. At least spare me those youthful horrors. Montgomery used to be just the same. You admit that it is the puma. Now be quiet, while I reel off my physiological lecture to you. And forthwith beginning, in the tone of a man supremely bored, but presently warming a little, he explained his work to me. He was very simple and convincing. Now and then there was a touch of sarcasm in his voice. Presently I found myself hot with shame at our mutual positions. The creatures I had seen were not men, and had never been men. They were animals, humanized animals, triumphs of vivisection. You forgot all that a skilled vivisector can do with living things, said Moreau. For my own part, I am puzzled why the things I have done here have not been done before. Small efforts, of course, have been made. Amputation, tongue cutting, excisions. Of course, you know, a squint may be induced or cured by surgery. Then, in the case of excisions, you have all kinds of secondary changes, pigmentary disturbances, modifications of the passions, alterations of the secretion of fatty tissue. I have no doubt you have heard of these things. Of course, said I, but these foul creatures of yours. All in good time, said he, waving his hand at me. I am only beginning. Those are trivial cases of alteration. Surgery can do better things than that. There is building up as well as breaking down and changing. You have heard, perhaps, of a common surgical operation resorted to in cases where the nose has been destroyed, a flap of skin is cut from the forehead and turned down on the nose and heals in a new position. This is a kind of grafting in a new position of part of an animal upon itself, grafting a freshly obtained material from another animal in also possible the case of teeth, for example. The grafting of skin and bone is done to facilitate healing. The surgeon places in the middle of the wound pieces of skin snipped from another animal or fragments of bone from a victim freshly killed. Hunter's cockspur, possibly you have heard of that, flourished on the bull's neck, and the rhinoceros rats of the Algerian Zougraves, who are also to be thought of. Monsters manufactured by transferring a slip from the tail of an ordinary rat to its snout and allowing it to heal in that position. Monsters manufactured, said I. Then you mean to tell me... Yes, These creatures you have seen are animals, carven and wrought into new shapes. To the study of plasticity of living forms, my life has been devoted. I have studied for years, gaining in knowledge as I go. I see you look horrified, and yet I am telling you nothing new. It all lay in the surface of practical anatomy years ago, but no one had the temerity to touch it. It is not simply the outward form of an animal which I can change. The physiology, the chemical rhythm of the creature may also be made to undergo an enduring modification, of which vaccination and other methods of inoculation with living or dead matter are examples that will, no doubt, be familiar to you. A similar operation is transfusion of blood, with which subject, indeed, I began. These are all familiar cases, less so, and probably far more extensive, were the operations of those medieval practitioners who made dwarfs and beggars cripples, who show monsters. Some vestiges of those arts still remain in the preliminary manipulation of the young mountebank or contortionist. Victor Hugo gives an account of them in L'Homme qui rit, but perhaps my meaning grows plain now. You begin to see that it is a possible thing to transplant tissue from one part of an animal to another, or from one animal to another, to alter its chemical reactions and methods of growth, to modify the articulations of its limbs, and, indeed, to change it in its most intimate structure. And yet, this extraordinary branch of knowledge has never been sought as an end, and systematically by modern investigators, until I took it up. Some such things have been hit upon in the last resort of surgery. Most of the kindred evidence that will recur to your mind has been demonstrated, as it were, by accident, by tyrants, by criminals, by breeders of horses and dogs, by all kinds of untrained, clumsy-handed men working for their own immediate ends. I was the first man to take up the question, armed with antiseptic surgery and with a really scientific knowledge of the laws of growth. Yet one would imagine it must have been practiced in secret before. Such creatures as the Siamese twins, and in the vaults of the Inquisition, no doubt their chief aim was artistic torture, but some, at least, of the inquisitors must have had a touch of scientific curiosity. But, said I, these things, these animals talk. He said that was so, and proceeded to point out that the possibility of vivisection does not stop at a mere physical metamorphosis. A pig may be educated. The mental structure is even less determinate than the bodily. In our growing science of hypnotism, we find the promise of a possibility of superseding old inherent instincts by new suggestions, grafting upon or replacing the inherited fixed ideas, very much indeed of what we call moral education, he said. In such an artificial modification and perversion of instinct, pugnacity is trained into courageous self-sacrifice, and suppressed sexuality into religious emotion. And the great difference between man and monkey is in larynx, he continued, in the incapacity to frame delicately different sound symbols by which thought could be sustained. In this I failed to agree with him, but with certain incivility he declined to notice my objection. He repeated that the thing was so, and continued his account of his work. I asked him why he had taken the human form as a model. There seemed to me then, and there still seems to me now, a strange wickedness for that choice. He confessed that he had chosen that form by chance. I might just as well have worked to form sheep into llamas or llamas into sheep. I suppose there is something in the human form that appeals to the artistic turn of mind more powerfully than any animal shape can. But I've not confined myself to man-making. Once or twice he was silent for a minute, perhaps. These years, how they have slipped by, and here I have wasted a day saving your life, and am now wasting an hour explaining myself. But, said I still do not understand. Where is your justification for inflicting all this pain? The only thing that could excuse vivisection to me would be some application. Precisely, said he. But you see, I am differently constituted. We are on different platforms. We are a materialist. I am not a materialist, I began hotly. In my view, for it is just this question of pain that parts us. So long as visible or audible pain turns you sick, so long as your own pains drive you, so long as pain underlies your propositions about sin, so long, I tell you, you are an animal, thinking a little less obscurely what an animal feels, this pain. I gave an impatient shrug at such sophistry. Oh, but it is such a little thing. A mind truly opened to what science has to teach must see that it is a little thing. It may be that save in this little planet, this speck of cosmic dust, invisible long before the nearest star could be attained, it may be, I say, that nowhere else does this thing called pain occur. But the laws we feel our way towards, why, even on this earth, even among living things, what pain is there? As he spoke, he drew a little penknife from his pocket, opened the smaller blade, and moved his chair so close that I could see his thigh. Then, choosing the place deliberately, he drove the blade into his leg and withdrew it. No doubt, he said, you have seen that before. It does not hurt a pinprick, but what does it show? The capacity for pain is not needed in the muscle, and it is not placed there, is but little needed in the skin, and only here and there over the thigh is a spot capable of feeling pain. Pain is simply our intrinsic medical advisor to warn us and stimulate us. Not all living flesh is painful, nor is all nerve, not even all sensory nerve. There is no taint of pain, real pain in the sensation of the optic nerve. If you wound the optic nerve, you merely see flashes of light, just as disease of the auditory nerve merely means a humming in the ears. Plants do not feel pain, nor the lower animals. It's impossible that such animals as starfish, crayfish, do not feel pain at all. Then with men, the more intelligent they become, the more intelligently they will see after their own welfare, and the less they will need the goad to help them out of danger. I never yet heard of a useless thing that was not ground out of existence by evolution sooner or later. Did you? And pain gets needless. Then I am a religious man, Prendick. Every sane must be. It may be, I fancy, that I have seen more of the ways of this world's maker than you, for I have sought his laws in my way all my life, while you, I understand, have been collecting butterflies. And I tell you, pleasure and pain have nothing to do with heaven or hell. Pleasure and pain, bah! What is your theologian's ecstasy but moments ori in the dark? This store which men and women set on pleasure and pain, Prendick, is the mark of the beast upon them. the mark of the beast from which they came. Pain, pain and pleasure, they are for us, only so long as we wriggle in the dust. You see, I went on with this research just the way it led me. That is the only way I ever heard of true research going. I asked the question, devised some method of obtaining an answer, and got a fresh question. Was this possible or that possible? You cannot imagine what this means to an investigator, what an intellectual passion grows upon him. You cannot imagine the strange, colorless delight of these intellectual desires. The thing before you is no longer an animal, a fellow creature, but a problem. Sympathetic pain, all I know of it, I remember as a thing I used to suffer from years ago. I wanted it, was the one thing I wanted, to find out the extreme limit of plasticity in a living shape. But, said I, the thing is an abomination. To this day, I have never troubled about the ethics of the matter, he continued. The study of nature makes a man at last as remorseless as nature. I have gone on not heeding anything but the question I was pursuing, and the material has dripped into the huts yonder. It is nearly 11 years since we came here, I and Montgomery and the 6 Cancas. I remember the green stillness of the island and the empty ocean about us as though it were yesterday. The place seemed waiting for me. The stores were landed and the house was built. The Cancas found some huts near the ravine. I went to work upon what I brought with me. There were some disagreeable things that happened at first. I began with a sheep, and I killed it after a day and a half by slipping of the scalpel. I took another sheep, and I made a thing of pain and fear and left it bound up to heal. It looked quite human to me when I had finished it, but when I went to it, I was discontented with it. It remembered me and was terrified beyond imagination, and it had no more than the wits of a sheep. The more I looked at the clumsier it seemed, until at last I put the monster out of its misery. These animals without courage, these fear-haunted, pain-driven things, without a spark of pugnacious energy to face torment, they are no good for man-making. Then I took a gorilla I had, and upon that, working with infinite care and mastering difficulty after difficulty, I made my first man. All the week, night and day, I molded him. With him, it was chiefly the brain that needed molding. Much had to be added, much changed. I thought of him a fair specimen of the Negroid type when I finished him, and he lay bandaged, bound, and motionless before me. It was only when his life was assured that I left him and came into this room again, and found Montgomery much as you are. He had heard some of the cries of as the thing grew human, cries like that disturbed you so. I didn't take him completely into my confidence at first, and the Cancas too. They realized something of it. They were scared out of their wits by the sight of me. I got Montgomery over to me in a way, and he had the hardest job to prevent the Cancas deserting. Finally, they did, and so we lost the yacht. I spent many days educating the brute. Altogether, I had him 3 or 4 months. I taught him the rudiments of English, gave him ideas of counting, even made the thing read the alphabet. But at that, he was slow. Though I've met with idiots slower, he began with a clean sheet mentally, had no memories left in his mind, and what he had been. When his scars were quite healed, and he was no longer anything but painful and stiff, and able to converse a little, I took him yonder and introduced him to the Cancas as the interesting stowaway. They were horribly afraid of him at first. Somehow, which offended me rather, for I was conceited about him. But he always seemed so mild, and he was so abject, that after a time they received him and took his education in hand. He was quick to learn, very imitative and adaptive, and built himself a hovel, rather better, it seemed to me, than their own shanties. There was one among the boys, a bit of a missionary, and he taught the thing to read, or at least pick out letters, and gave him some rudimentary ideas of morality. But it seems the beast's habits were not all that desirable. I rested from my work some days after this, and was in my mind to write an account of the whole affair to wake up English physiology. Then I came upon the creature squatting up there in a tree, gibbering at two of the Kankas who had been teasing him. I threatened him, told him the inhumanity of such proceeding, aroused his sense of shame, and came home resolved to do better before I took my own work back to England. I have been doing better, but somehow the things drift back again. The stubborn beast flesh grows day by day again, and I mean to do better things still. I mean to conquer that. This puma, but that's the story. All the Kanka boys are dead now, for one fell overboard on the launch, and one died of a wounded heel that he poisoned in some way with plant juice. 3 went away in the yacht, and I suppose hope were drowned. The other one was killed. Well, I have replaced them. Montgomery went on much as you and disposed to do at first, and then. What became of the other one? Said I sharply. The other Kanka who was killed. The fact is, after I had made a number of human creatures, I made a thing. He hesitated. Yes, said I. It was killed. I don't understand, said I. Do you mean to say it killed the Kanka? Yes. It killed several other things that it caught. We chased it for a couple of days. It only got loose by accident, and I never meant it to get away. It wasn't finished. It was purely an experiment. It was a limbless thing with a horrible face and wreathed around on the ground in a serpentine fashion. It was immensely strong and in infuriating pain. It lurked in the woods for some time until we hunted it, and then it wriggled into the northern part of the island, and we divided the party close to upon it. Montgomery insisted upon coming with me. The man had a rifle, and when his body was found, one of the barrels was curved into the shape of an S and very nearly bitten off. Montgomery shot the thing. After that, I stuck to the ideal humanity, except for the little things. He became silent. I sat in silence watching his face. So for 20 years altogether, counting 9 years in England, I have been going on, and there is still something in everything I do that defeats me, makes me dissatisfied, challenges me to further effort. Sometimes I rise above the level, sometimes I fall below it, but I always fall short of the things I dream. The human shape I can get now, almost with ease, so that is lithe and graceful, or thick and strong. But often there is trouble with the hands and the claws, painful things that I dare not shape too freely. But it is in the subtle grafting and reshaping one must needs do to the brain that troubles lie. The intelligence is often oddly low, with unaccountable blank ends, unexpected gaps, and least satisfactory of all is something that cannot touch, somewhere cannot determine where in the seat of the emotions. Cravings, instincts, desires that humanity, a strange hidden reservoir, to burst forth suddenly and inundate the whole being of the creature with anger, hate, or fear, These creatures of mine seemed strange and uncanny to you so soon as you began to observe them. But to me, just after I make them, they seem to be indisputably human beings. It's afterwards, as I observe them, that the persuasion fades. First one animal trait, then another creeps to the surface and stares out at me. But I will conquer yet. Each time I dip a living creature into the bath of burning pain, I say, this time I will burn out the animal. This time I will make a rational creature of my own. After all, what is 10 years? Men have been 100,000 in the making. He thought darkly, but I am drawing near the fantasies of the fastness. This puma of mine, after a silence, and they revert. As soon as my backhand is taken from them, the beast begins to creep back and begins to assert itself again. Another long silence. Then you take the things you make into those dens, said I. They go. I turn them out when I begin to feel the beast in them, and presently they wander there. They all dread this house and me. There is a kind of travesty of humanity over there. Montgomery knows about it, for he interferes in their affairs. He has trained one or two of them to our service. He's ashamed of it, but I believe he half likes some of those beasts. It's my business, not mine. They only sicken me with a sense of failure. I take no interest in them. I fancy they follow the lines of the Kanka missionary marked out, and have a kind of mockery of a rational life. Poor beasts! There's something they call the law. Sing hymns about all thine. They build themselves their dens, gather fruit and pull herbs, marry even. But I can see through it all, see their very souls, and they're nothing but souls of beasts, beasts that perish, anger and lusts to live and gratify themselves. Yet they are odd, complex like everything else. There is a kind of upward striving in them, part vanity, part waste sexual emotion, part waste curiosity. It only mocks me. I have some hope of this puma. I have worked hard at her head and brain. And now, said he, standing up after a long gap of silence, during which we had each pursued our own thoughts, what do you think? Do you still fear me? I looked at him. I saw but a white-faced, white-haired man with calm eyes, save for his severity, the touch almost of beauty, and that resulted from his set tranquility and his magnificent build. He might have passed muster among 100 other comfortable old gentlemen. Then I shivered. By way of answer to his second question, I handed him a revolver with either hand. Keep them, he said, and snatched at a yawn. He stood up, stared at me for a moment, and smiled. You have had 2 eventful days, said he. I should advise some sleep. I'm glad it's all clear. Good night. He thought me over for a moment, then went out by the inner door. I immediately turned the key in the outer one. I sat down again, sat for a time in a kind of stagnant mood, so weary emotionally, mentally, and physically that I could not think beyond the point at which he had left me. The black window stared at me like an eagle eye. At last, with an effort, I put out the light and got into the hammock. Very soon, I was asleep. And that, my friend, my friends, is the end of chapter 14. A little grisly, a little gruesome, very insightful. We're starting to understand what is at play here on the island of Dr. Moreau. I hope you're able to stay with it, because tomorrow we begin chapter 15. Thank you so much. for joining me tonight. This has been Indiana Homes. Good night, all.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.